Hello, and welcome to this video on Advanced Capital Strategy Management. Advanced Capital Strategy Management walks through how you create the optimal blend of financing by implementing what we call a stacked capital strategy. We're going to cover topics such as determining how much cash that you actually need, see multiple businesses within your one business, which we'll explain in the detail in that portion of the video. And then we're going to talk about how do you actually design your stacked capital strategy, and then finally, how do you know that you've done it correctly? Now, before we get started, I want to make a note. There's a reason that this is called Advanced Capital Strategy Management. For those of you maybe not as familiar with finance and numbers and those types of things, some of this may be very detailed or frankly over your head at your current state and time. However, it's important to know that you want to have this video as a resource so that as your business tends to scale, you need to get into more advanced capital management than maybe where you're at today if, for example, you're taking out your first Amazon loan. Okay, let's get started. Don't worry if you don't understand all of the concepts here. Make sure that you understand them theoretically, and then as you move forward in your business, you can come back to them to make them more and more practical for the situation at that time. Strategic finance is really the function that tells you how much cash that you need each month. So in addition to putting together your historical accounting, you want to be putting together your forecasts, and then your forecasts generate your cash flow forecasts. Corporate development is the function that then acts upon that information and helps you understand, what do I do about it? You'll be calculating your go-forward net working capital, which is how much capital you need to scale your inventory. Then you'll also be calculating what's called your capital expenditures needs, or your expansion capital. The two of them together is your total cash need. So you need money for inventory, but you also need money for things like new marketplaces, new channels, brands, or even new ventures. And you need money for team expansion or marketing expansion. And you need to understand, when you put all of those things together, what's the total capital need. And then in addition to that, as you can see, we really have three sections, not two. You've got your net working capital, your capital expenditures, and then you have to plan in life for having extra capital in case of failed launches, increased costs, or other types of downturns that, as we all know, are going to afflict every business at some point in time. So, anytime that you take in capital, you have to understand that you've accelerated the business, and the reward goes up, but also the risk goes up. So because of that, you need to have an increasingly set of better financial controls, meaning that if you take in $500,000, you have to know much more about your financials of your business than if you take in $5,000, because otherwise you could find yourself in trouble. The prerequisites for understanding how much capital that you should take in is having accurate historical numbers on both a cash flow basis and on an accrual accounting basis, because that tells you how profitable that you are in the eyes of a buyer. You also need to have an accurate forecast in the business. And then the third thing that I say is table stakes to get in the game of raising capital is you have to stay disciplined and not just using capital because you have it. If you don't have these three, I really recommend that, other than a small amount of capital to start a business, you don't get into the capital game too heavy. What we're going to talk about next is showing you that inside of your business, inside your P&L, you actually have multiple businesses. And I want you to start thinking about your business in this way, in terms of what is going well and is ready for more scaling, what might be in growth or expansion mode that does have a high likelihood of success, and what are initiatives that have a higher risk level. And the reason is that you want to design a capital strategy that matches those different types. Let's take a look at how. The three businesses is within one analogy. I have mature products. Okay, inside mature products that are already ranked, I have $1 million of revenue, as you can see. I've got a contribution of $290,000, or a 29% contribution margin, and I'm 26% profitable on those businesses. That's a pretty nice business. So you say to yourself, that's certainly worth expanding. But then you also have new products, and you may be one of the lucky few that you've got $200,000 in new products and you have higher expense loads because you've been lowering the price to get rank, but you're still making 5% on that particular business. But then the third thing is you have new expansions that you're working on, such as going direct to consumer or building out social channels or those types of things. And this is additional investment into the business that you've got going on that's losing 20%. So if you only looked at the total amount of this business and you saw it as one business, you'd see it as a $1.3 million business that's making $250,000 a year. And you'd say to yourself, okay, you know what? That's maybe not that big of a deal. But if you look at it inside the three businesses, you know exactly where to put the capital to scale the particular business. So you take that and then you start to analyze how much cash do you need in each one of these particular areas. And the way that you do that is you do what's called a net working capital calculation. This was something that is a core bedrock of strategic finance. You strip out the cash and some of the other equity parts of your balance sheet, and you look at how much cash that it takes to run the business. You then add in the expansion capital for the business. You forecast your growth, and it tells you the capital need that you have from what I will call a top-down approach. So in this particular example, our net working capital, as you can see, is $80,000 in the second graph, and we need another $50,000 for new products, but we're growing at 25% a year. So that $80,000 has got to increase to up to $100,000, as you can see the negative $100,000 along the right, because of the fact that we're growing. But then we are going to generate some cash from the business so that we have to forecast some cash coming in. When you put all of that together and you fill out this as a workbook that you have, worksheet you have in your workbook, you get to a forecasted capital need. Okay. Then we can now say, let's start to design our stacked capital strategy. Remember that just as how most projects take longer than you expect to complete them, most companies need more cash than they think, and you need to plan for that. Your business, as you can now see, is a blend of activities that all have different levels of cash and different levels of risk. And we want to design a capital strategy that assigns the right amount of capital against that risk level. So the key question doesn't become how much cash do I need? It becomes how much cash do I need in each category of my business? So the stacked capital strategy is the solution to that. I'm going to describe where many of you might be at today. The first thing is you're worrying too much about paying your bills. And from a cost of capital perspective, or think of it as like an interest rate, in my mind, that's the most expensive drain on your company, costing you like 300% interest a year. The same thing with running out of stock. If you run out of stock and lose inventory or lose rank, you've just got to now re-rank that. That's like taking out a loan for 200% interest rate, which you'd be crazy to do. And as we move down the stack, what you find is a lot of people will take profit share deals. Someone will finance my inventory for 50% of the profits. That usually ends up being like a couple hundred percentage points of cost to you. You have friendly equity deals, family and friend money done wrong. But now we start to get into more traditional financing, Amazon lending, credit card banks and loans, lines of credit, trade financing, and ultimately where people don't spend enough time is focusing the fact that the better supplier terms that you get, if I can get 20% of my payments delayed for 30 days, I just got a free interest-free loan from my supplier on a 30-day revolving basis. So that's today. Many of you may resonate with this and say, yep, that looks like me. The stacked capital strategy flips this on its head and says by tomorrow, we first want to focus on how many dollars can we get in supplier free financing, or even if we have to pay a nominal interest cost because it's an unsecured loan for the business, I'm now shifting the bottom to the top in terms of my priority. Then I work through if I have to pay a little bit by unit, bank lines, lines of credits and loans, Amazon lending, trade financing, and then I use my more expensive things. And the goal is that I bring down to the bottom and hopefully eliminate any of the most expensive ideas that I have today for my capital strategy. So think of how powerful this is in terms of kind of reversing the stream from a capitalization perspective. Okay. The next concept that I want to share with you is don't take equity level risk with debt level financing, particularly if it's personally guaranteed. Here's what I mean by that. If I've got an inventory for a current product that's already successful, that's a great candidate for taking more debt funding in to be able to finance the working capital needs and buy more inventory. It's already profitable, it's already ranked. Go ahead and take some financing to accelerate the success of that business. But if I have new product launches or channel expansions, I got to be careful, because if I take in personal secured debt for things that don't work out, I'm creating an obligation for myself. And for things that don't have hard assets against them, such as marketing and expansion costs, be very, very careful that you only borrow up to a certain ratio of the sales. For example, I'm only going to borrow money on marketing up to 10% of what my sales are, because that's the amount I really should be spending in that bucket of the company. Here's what you do when you have a stacked capital strategy that's done right. You look at your capital needs by category into the different uses of funds. As you can see here in the worksheet that we've provided for you, I've got successful products, growing products, and new products. I've got capital expenditures for new marketplaces, new channels. I've got marketing expansion, team expansion, and brand expansion. And then I've got my cushion and my rainy day fund. Then you allocate your risks and your reward tolerances. And then you allocate the security type against those. So as you can see, my successful products, I need $50,000 for that. I'm willing to do that as senior debt, and I'm even willing to personally guarantee that amount because I know that it's going to be successful. But my growing products and my new products that I have coming out, I'm going to actually finance with something called mezz debt financing, or more expensive financing, because it's business guaranteed only, as opposed to going to my bank and creating more personal guaranteed loans for myself. And then finally, you might have some new venture or a major new channel that you want to bring in an equity partner into the business that is essentially a convertible debt, where it might start out as debt and or you may convert it to equity. So at least you know that it's a major new expansion for the business, but you're not putting the overall business at risk. So the action item here is to take a look at how much capital that you need to fund your growth, and then allocate it into the different buckets that you have, which will create for you a future version of your stacked capital strategy allocation. And if there's a gap between the amount of capital that you need and the amount of debt that you are willing to take, that's where the concept of bringing on an equity provider or an equity investor makes sense for your particular business. Because all cash needs are different in terms of the size of the capital need, the risk against it, and the return, you have to start thinking of capital strategy not as a strategy, but as a series of layered but integrated capital strategies. That's what advanced capital strategy is all about. And those need to match the different need types in your business. This video, while advanced, I admit that, will be a key understanding as you scale to larger and larger capital needs to only deploy capital at the risk level and at the return level that it deserves. Developing a stacked capital strategy will help align this and allow you to not only aggressively expand, but aggressively expand while mitigating risk to your highest valuation. Thank you.